Welcome back to the Adapt or Die podcast. I'm your host with the most, Armel Tala.
And I'm your host on the low, Ben Smith. This podcast is focused on one thing, finding practical ways to improve your health, wealth, and happiness.
As I like to say, you only peak once you stop trying. Thanks for joining us in our journey of lifelong learning.
And now it's time for the next episode of
The Adapt or Die podcast. Welcome back to another episode. You might be happy to hear that we're on a new book. We spent the last 2 months on the same book, so some of you guys might have been bored. Some of you guys might have thought it was really interesting. Hopefully we made it kind of interesting, but Ben, how did you feel about the last 2 months?
I mean, we spent the last 2 months on 2 books, which was, 12 Rules for Life was really good. Maybe Rethink My Life. Thinking Fast and Slow was also good, but it was just like, I think it's time for a new topic.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for new ideas.
For new ideas. That's the whole point, exploring all ideas. Not we do range. We're pretty diverse in our thinking here.
This
we
is
went
true.
From psych to, 12 Rules for Life is also psych. And before that I even forgot all the books we read before.
We read last semester we read books about sleep, learning, sapiens, essentialism, productivity, deep work, a lot of cool stuff. Check it out.
Some history coming up, but today, what's the topic today in the book?
Today, our book is 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel.
Peter Thiel.
Are you sure it's Thiel?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Thiel.
Okay, it might be Thiel, but maybe it's Thiel. I honestly don't know.
Whichever way you want to say it. I'm sorry, Peter, if you actually ever do come across this.
But today, the main topic is the essence of startups and monopolies, which he has a very interesting take on monopolies. So I'm kind of excited to share it. Because it really, I thought it definitely changed I did not think like that at all. So.
Oh, yeah. And this is a perfect time around because we're actually working on a startup. So there's a lot to be learned here. I'm excited. All right. But to begin with, let's talk about going from 0 to 1. So there's 2 types of progress. There's vertical progress and then there's horizontal progress. So vertical progress is going from 0 to 1, like the book entitled. This is what we generally consider good progress, and that's creating new things. Now, horizontal progress is going from 1 to more, 1 to n, whatever n might be, and that's just copying things that work. So vertical progress is really defined as technology and creating new things, and almost everything made before is technology. Like a table at some point was technology, but when we're talking about the modern day, we're talking mainly about, you hear a lot about more like techie. When you think tech, you think like computers and high-tech robots and, machinery. And so a lot of times you're going to associate Silicon Valley as the center of technology. And some examples are, like I said, literally almost anything. Computers, assembly line, light bulbs, even the spoon was a technology. Now, horizontal progress, this is expanding and replicating existing technologies, otherwise known as globalization. And the one country that embodies globalization the best is China. And Thiel says they straight up copied everything that worked from the U.S., like 19th century railroads, 20th century air conditioning, internet, phones, even entire cities. And the thing is, we want vertical progress, and horizontal progress is not bad, but we want to focus on vertical progress.
Now, if you're like me, you probably think we live in a golden age of vertical progress, but Thiel actually kind of contradicts this idea. He says that we are basically in a golden age of globalization, so horizontal progress. And the way he really shows us was our terminology with how we develop split countries. So we have developed nations, and then we have developing nations, and the fact that we have quote unquote developed nations makes us feel as if we're fully developed, as if there's nowhere else for us to go.
There's no more developing to do.
Yeah, there's just we've already invented everything. And then obviously for developing nations, the nations like China and India, who are they're actually, as they are progressing, they're not making new technology, they're copying what's already existing, right? And so technology actually hasn't progressed that much. I think you said this, like, besides like telecommunications, like there hasn't been a whole lot of like new tech in technology, like in the world. Like it's just been like kind of the spread of like existing tech. Um, and Peter Thiel makes a really interesting point that we need technology. Okay, the world is not defined by globalization. The world is not improved by globalization. It can improve, but not like it doesn't get pushed forward through globalization. And a really easy way to think about this is that without new technology, if everyone consumed like an American consumed, we would have massive worldwide issues, right? Environmentally, it would be catastrophic. We would who knows what would happen, honestly. Like I even like fret to think about such a scenario because it like I mean, what about like the whales, bruh? Like, like what would happen?
The
Like,
whales.
um, but his main point in that was that many of us think that globalization and horizontal progress can define the future, but that's not true. What defines the future is technology, creating something. It's going from 0 to 1, and this has really stagnated in the past half century. And so, our duty as a generation is to improve the future. We must create new technology, not spread existing ones.
Yep. And I want to say on that point that like it's so scary to think if actually everybody consumed like Americans without some type of innovation to make energy consumption more efficient. Because you guys, I'm sorry, uh, s- uh, renewable energy is not actually the solution. Like it's not actually the solution. But there's some
For
crazy
real?
things coming around. There's some
No, there are
crazy
definitely
things.
some crazy things.
But progress is not automatic. It has to be earned. Creating new technology is insanely difficult. You can ask those that are trying to solve some of the hardest problems in the world. But most people sit around and think someone else would do it. And I love this, what Peter kind of says and what Ben kind of synthesized, saying we expect progress, yet don't strive for it ourselves. This is not only just in terms of like large scale, but also just as yourself as a person, right? But so we should expect progress, but it's not automatic. Like you should be expecting that progress will happen because that's healthy. You want to be thinking that the future is going to be better than the past, but you should not expect it to be automatic. You can't sit on your butt. You have to try to contribute towards that progress in any way that you can. And a great analogy for this is like professional athletes are expected to perform to their abilities, up to their abilities. But just because they can perform does not mean they'll actually perform up to their abilities all the time. That takes consistency with practice, eating healthy, preparing for games, and all that. And so, in terms of when we're talking about building companies and startups, is like that takes always searching to try to solve a problem and always trying to figure out ways to do things better and new. And so, to make vertical progress, we have to put in the work. Without putting in the work, we're simply just untapped potential. So the key point here is progress isn't automatic. We must work to fulfill it.
But who is making all this progress? Well, the answer, as Mel loves this, the answer is startups. Peter Thiel says that startups is where really almost all, if not most, if not all of our progress comes from. And a startup, simply defined, is a small group of people bound together by a sense of mission to change the world for the better. So in that sense, it's not necessarily someone who's creating a SaaS business or just starting a new business endeavor. It's a group of people who are actually just trying to do something for the world, not necessarily tying it to money. So some just really general examples would be like Google, Apple, Facebook. Those are some like places where we like generally think of startup Silicon Valley, like that tech entrepreneurship. But some other examples would be like the founding fathers. Like they created something new with like the Constitution, and that created the U.S. today. And then the Royal Society. I don't know if you all have heard of that, but it's all about like science and like introducing new ideas. So a startup can just be any group of people. But why startups? Why do startups really push forward the world? Like why not large organizations? Why not individual people? And it's because individuals need help. Individuals can't do everything alone. They need multiple people. It's just simply too much work for one person to do everything. And then on the flip side, large organizations they move too slow. They're too bureaucratic. They're very risk averse. They're often blinded by profit squeezing. And so what you want is something in the middle, which turns out to be a startup. Startups have enough people to get things done, but not too many to really slow them down. They have space to think, and they also have space to act quickly and do things that they think is in the best interest of their company and their customers.
When it comes to business and startups, so been defined that startups is just a group of people trying to make the world better, and like the founding fathers, which that is like the broader sense of the word startup that you could try to apply, at least in Peter Thiel's eyes. But we're gonna talk about startups when it comes to business. And when it comes to business, this might sound a bit strange to you, but if you are in business, this is also very true. Competition is for losers.
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
And
whoa, whoa. Did I hear you right?
competition is for losers. I don't know who you're trying to compete against, but you're not competing against me because I am not a loser. And so, the American culture, at least in economics, like we view that perfect competition is ideal, right? And perfect competition is no firm company sells every firm or company sells pretty much the same good, so there's no differentiation. No firm has any market power, and if the market expands, new firms will enter, the market diminished, and that firms go out of business, right? So it's very much based that there's just this perfect amount of competition, and which when there is perfect competition, no one is really that different. So an example of small businesses turning a profit, insanely difficult, right? Dominating like the market that you're in, like if you're in Austin or whatever, it's pretty difficult. There's a lot of good places to eat, and people just generally look at different cuisines, like whatever, Asian, Indian, all these different foods, like they're all just food, they're all just restaurants, right? And then making a profit similar to tech companies, laughable. And so the point here is under perfect competition, no company makes profit in the long term. So to build a company with lasting values, you don't build an undifferentiated commodity business. So what does that mean? What do you build? You build a monopoly.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. A monopoly?
A monopoly, right? So we're not talking about crony capitalism, the ones that try to do illegal things to take out the competition, or that try to just like make really just oversell a product that isn't actually that valuable. A monopoly, they create products that are so much better than their competition that people just want to buy it. They don't want to go anywhere else to buy it. And so because of this, monopolies can set a value that is actually fair for what their product is and still maximize profits because they're creating something that is just so much better. It's like, what else are you going to buy? Examples, Google. You're going to use Bing? I'm sorry, I haven't touched Bing in a while.
Not a
Like
chance.
Google has not had competition in like 20 years. Apple, come on now. Like we already blue messages are green, right?
If you got a green message, we can't be
Emojis. Do you want to
friends.
see your emojis? Do you want to see the emojis? Or do you want to use that Android camera? Nah. Even though Android cameras can be nice, but the reason why they actually suck when you're talking about using them in social media apps is because there's so many different types of Androids that they have to use some type of like algorithm that like makes them worse just so that it's compatible with all different phones and sees them. When you have an iPhone, it's all the same. So everybody that takes pictures of iPhone sees the same thing. Sorry, that's a little side tangent. But Amazon, 2-day shipping, like you don't really get better than that.
So you're probably wondering the same thing I was also wondering is like, aren't monopolies like evil?
Mm, maybe.
Well, Thiel does not seem. I'm gonna stop saying Thiel. I'm gonna say Peter because I'm not sure if how to say his name. To be honest, Peter doesn't seem to think so. And the reason is because we live in a we live in a dynamic world, right? So monopolies really only hurt society if we live in a world that is static or unchanging, and that's because if monopoly has clear control over a market, and there's no progression at all, then the monopoly is simply squeezing customers for profits. But we live in a dynamic world, a world where things go from 0 to 1, where things are changing, where technologies are here. And that allows monopolies to actually, it allows new companies to create monopolies by inventing new technology, by creating new things. And so an example of this would be he goes over how in the 1960s and 70s, IBM had a hardware monopoly. And then they were replaced in the 1980s by Microsoft's software monopoly, who was then replaced by Apple's mobile computing monopoly. So these monopolies, while they do exist, it's not like they are simply sucking the life force out of society. It's actually that they're creating something that is so new, so much better. They're creating something so valuable that no one else can even really compete with them, right? And the government actually knows this. He makes a really great point that like, why do we have patent laws if we don't like monopolies? And I was like, that's kind of a good point because like, why would we protect someone's idea if we didn't think that the idea like belonged to something like it was worth protecting for that person who created it, right? Because when you create something that's so much better than everyone else has created, then like you deserve to reap the benefits of that idea for I guess however long the government deems so. So that was an interesting idea. Um, but the question, going back to the question, are monopolies actually evil? And I don't think so. I think that monopolies, while they can be evil. Companies like Coca-Cola or whatever, like they're doing lobbying, and it's like they're not inventing anything new at this point. But when you're having new monopolies, create new technology and better the world, that actually is pushing forward our economy, our society, and making us all better humans, I think.
Wow. And so we have to debrief on everything we just talked about, because that is like, if you that's your first time hearing Peter Thiel view on startups and competition, then you're probably a bit taken back. You're like, dude, is he crazy?
Yeah, is he what? Is he out of his mind? What
Like
what is he talking about?
no, like literally. So what I would say is there's different types of monopolies out there, and we're speaking on the good ones. And like today's world is a bit like, the government is having a hard time defining monopolies nowadays, because like you have companies like Google, Facebook, and everything. Like Facebook dominates real heavily social media. Google dominates search, and to be a monopoly by definition is like you have to control like 50% of the market share, and then like more than 50%, then you're kind of like considered like a monopoly. But also the older definition is um that you also are like hurting consumers by like you since you dominate the market, you set the price at whatever you want to super maximize profits. But that's a bit different when you're talking about like Google and Facebook. And when you say Apple, like maybe a little
Yeah,
argument about Apple, but with nowadays, it's those companies give their services for free to consumers, and they charge advertisers, so they're charging other businesses. So like the government right now is having a really hard time dealing with like the new companies that are like are modern monopolies today, because it's like, well, they're not hurting the consumer, they're actually helping the consumer a lot.
yeah,
Like you're getting to search and use all types of social medias all for free. So like it's this like weird point where it's like, okay, how do we now define what a
right.
monopoly is?
Although if you're someone like me who takes their privacy pretty seriously and also doesn't like social media, you might be saying that uh like just being on Google or social or Facebook all the time, like they're tracking you, and like maybe you think it's like is it really for free, or is it like are they just taking advantage of like you spending so much time on their services? So it's like there's definitely two sides to the debate, but
I'm on the very much side. It's like, just let these companies be, because to me, when you say like,
disclaimer, he works at Google.
I mean, yeah, that's true. An intern there, but
I'm just
like
kidding.
they didn't give me any stocks. I don't have any
That's
ownership.
true. That's true.
But like to me, it's like you're getting that service for free, and it's like, well, companies should have been more clear about what their actual business model is, so that people understand, and like obviously like data protection and privacy. But what to me, it's like, what are you putting on those sites that like you are scared to, if it's something that like that important, you should not be putting out there. And also it's like, well, what they're doing is trying to optimize what ads you should be viewing. Is like, is that so evil? Like, is that like the worst thing that you could experience from being able to search anything on the internet for free? Is that, oh my god, no, they're tracking my data and giving it to advertisers. Now, I see the real problem when it comes to like data breaches. Like, you guys understand, I'm a big Web3 supporter and advocate about decentralization, owning your own data. So like, I'm on the side of that. But what I'm saying is, like, people sometimes, to me, like, people overdo that point,
Hmm.
and it's like, well, one, you still use it, so it's not that big of a concern to you. It's you just want to be a part of a crowd that's like that. Like, everyone wants to be anti-establishment, and then two, it's like, I'm sorry that you now get to see ads that might be more relevant to you. It's like, I don't know how to view it. I don't know how to view it. I understand the data breaches, and I understand like you could actually be making money off of it though. That's why I'm a big supporter of Web3, is because you can take that data and then you can say, hey, company, if you want to use it and give it to advertisement, you have to give me a bigger cut of what you guys are actually charging the advertisers, so you as a user can actually get paid for it. So like, there's two sides of it, but
Hmm.
I think people overblow it sometimes.
Yeah, and I think we kind of got off on a tangent. I think his big point was just that like a lot of people think that like monopolies are anti-capitalism. It's like the antithesis of capitalism. But really, and he makes this point, and it really blew my mind. It's like capitalism actually incentivizes monopolies in a lot of ways, right? Like capitalism, the structure is that like if you create something that's so much better than everyone else, you get the rewards of that. And it's like that's what a monopoly is as far as what we're talking about. You know, of course there were old, they had like a bunch of antitrust laws and all that stuff back in like the
Like
19th
the
century.
Rockefeller
And yeah,
days,
it's because companies were, they were,
like
doing weird,
controlling the
yeah,
market, buying everything and gouging, like raising the prices
right,
for
doing like
absurd reasons.
very shady things, right? But now it's like, well, yeah, Apple's phone is just way better to me. Like, I don't really want to use. Am I blowing a bag on it? Like, yeah, but like, it's kind of worth it to me. Like, so it's kind of like the, capitalism and monopolies are like they're not two separate ideas. Like, monopolies are an embedded part of capitalism in a lot of ways. I thought that was really interesting.
On and like one thing on that point is that capitalism, keyword capital, you want to accumulate capital, right? And it blew my mind when he said like perfect competition means there is actually no profits, and I was like, that makes sense. And so therefore, like you said, capitalism does incentivize monopolies, because if you want to play the game of capitalism, you're trying to accumulate as much capital as possible, getting making sure that your profit margins are good. So you obviously will try to build you should be trying to build a monopoly. It's like it's such a counterintuitive thing, but it's so ingrained in our society
Hmm.
about competition. And this point he made absolutely blew my mind. And he was saying, like, we're conditioned into a competition like culture, right? Like the education system gives us grades and ranked us based on our potential. And this quote right here, like, game changer. Higher education is a place where people who had big plans in high school get stuck in fierce rivalries with equally smart peers over conventional careers like management consulting and investment banking. For the privilege of being turned into conformists, students pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in skyrocketing tuition. Like, think about that.
Hip hip hooray!
Like, you're just like, it's crazy when you put it in that sense. Like, we, like, a lot of people in high school probably did have big dreams and stuff, and then they go
Hmm.
into the workforce, they go to college, and they realize how smart everyone else is around them. Maybe they get shied away from, like, continuing those big ambitious dreams, but then they just become fine with being like, you, oh yeah, I'm already here and I can get a really good job. And it's wow.
Yeah, and one quote thing that he said that really hit me, and just to give some context for this quote, Peter went to law school, and he really wanted to get a clerkship for the Supreme Court, one of the Supreme Court justices, and he didn't get it. And then he mentions this quote after like talking with a friend, some years later about how things turned out for his life, and he says, "Had I actually clerked on the Supreme Court, I probably would have spent my entire career drafting other people's business deals instead of creating anything new. It's hard to say how much will be different." And then he says something else on the end of that, because he was a Rhodes Scholar, which is just like as a scholar in the law school, I guess. And he says all Rhodes Scholars had a great future in their past. And I was like, wow, like a great future in their past. Like that just hit me because I was like, how much potential are we wasting trying to kind of find the certain path in life, trying to find like that job that like I'll get this job and like I'll be set for my life, and it's like I'll just do this, and it's like that's cool. I'm not like shitting out, but it's like so many people think that's like the end all be all in life, whereas like we fail to like take that uncertain road of like let me go build something, start something, be creative. Like it might not work, but like what if it did? Like that could be more fulfilling too.
Yeah.
So
And you can always keep that job and still fulfill your dreams. And that's why people, even if you do have a good, like, solid 9 to 5 job, you should be looking for ways to, do things on the side that you're really passionate about. You really think could be big, because someday it could. And then you could, leave your 9 to 5 and really work on what you really want to work on. But with that being said, let's get back to the topics of monopolies. Now, when it comes to startups, like evaluating startups and evaluating high growth tech companies specifically can be difficult, right? So how do you actually evaluate them? So like a perfect example we'll use is like Twitter's IPO in 2013. So in 2013, when they IPO'd, New York Times and Twitter, like, they were roughly about the same size in terms of maybe like the amount of people that work there. And they like both gave news relatively. Like, I honestly use Twitter as like my news feed, to be honest. Sometimes, actually, it's the only where I get news.
that was a big shift. I think I use it sometimes. Actually, it's the only place I get it from.
Besides podcasts, it's like one of the main sources. But Twitter at that time, 2013, when they IPO'd, like they IPO'd, went public, they were losing money. The New York Times earned $133 million. Now, Twitter's valuation is 24 billion. When they IPO'd, it was 24 billion. The New York Times valuation, you guys want to guess? 2 billion. One company's losing money worth 24 billion. One company's making money worth 2 billion. So why was Twitter valued so much more? Is because a great business is one that can endure in the future. So we think long term when we're thinking about investing. And so more specifically, the value of a business equals the net value of its cash flows. The net value of its future cash flows. Geez, let me say that again. The value of a business equals the net value of its future cash flows. So Twitter is expected to generate, like in simple terms, like Twitter is expected to generate more cash flow in the future than the New York Times, which means it gets a higher value because investors think long term. So the takeaway here is a company's value is its value for the future, not its value in the past. So you got to think, will this company be around in a decade? Because you must think critically. Like you won't get any stats or numbers. You just have to think through and really almost kind of predict the future.
Now, when thinking about companies that dominate, like, Twitter, Facebook, Apple, like that, we can think of a few, but it doesn't seem like there are that many monopolies out there. It doesn't seem like it just seems like we're all in like this nice equilibrium of the economy. But Thiel makes this great point that like our most businesses fall on one side of the extreme or the other, in the sense that either they are in perfect competition, or very close to it, or they are essentially a monopoly, and that most businesses, it's very binary. It's like there are very few businesses that are in between. And it's like, if this is true, it's like, why don't we see the economy that way? Like, why don't we actually see monopolies for what they are, or businesses that are in perfect competition for what they are? And it's because both types of businesses don't want you to know what type of competition they're in. Like, monopolies don't want you to know that they have monopoly.
Because obviously very bad if the government knew that.
Exactly. And then it's like, if a company's in perfect competition, it's like, and they're kind of struggling to get any hold of the market share, like all other businesses in their market. It's like, they're not going to tell you that that like they're in that competition. They're going to be like, oh yeah, no, we're way ahead of everyone else. Like, we're the best, right? And so, just to give some examples of this, Google, we all know Google owns the search engine market, right? Like, if you use Bing, like, good luck to you.
Wait, tell them the percentage, because I don't even know this percentage right, but it's absurd.
Yeah, according to Forbes last year, I just pulled this off the internet this morning. They own 86.64% of the search engine market, which is just utter domination. Like, that is like supreme domination as far as a market share in business. Like, that's insane.
For context, like I think Apple owns like a little bit over half, maybe like 60% in the US, but like they don't own like that much of the market when it comes to like smartphones, when you're talking globally. So
it's crazy domination. And it's like, clearly Google has a monopoly over the search engine market, right? But you don't really hear Google saying like, we're competing in the search engine market. Like, what do you hear? Well, let's just expand our horizons as far as what Google's quote unquote market is. They might say we're in the online advertising market, or they might expand it further, like, no, we're in the U.S. advertising market, or even more, we're in the global advertising market. And then it's like, well, how much of the global advertising market does Google own? 3.4%. Boom, not a monopoly. Wait. So what monopolies do is they try to disguise themselves as like not being a monopoly by expanding the market that they're in, and being like, Google's like, we're a tech company. Like, we own, 0.2% of like consumer tech products worldwide. And it's like, yeah, worldwide consumer tech products. Really? Is that even like a real market? Like, it is, but it's like, what? Like, you
so
can't even, it's
broad.
so broad. It's like, what does that even mean? And it's like, so they just widen the horizons of what their market actually is. And on the flip side, just real quick, to give you an example of small businesses that will say, we're not in perfect competition.
Or even startups do this, and the reason why
Mhm.
startups lie about the competition is to obviously get investors to want to really fund them.
Exactly. And what, gives this example about a British restaurant in Palo Alto, which is just a city in California. Um, And he's like, if you were trying to start a new British restaurant in Palo Alto, you might be like, well, we're starting something new. Like, there's no British restaurants around here. We're creating, we're going to capture the entirety of this market. But then you might step back and ask, like, does anyone in Palo Alto eat British food? Like, is that actually the market they're in? Like, if I'm gonna go eat food, do I only consider British food or do I consider like all the foods? Or it's like, is it just people in Palo Alto or is it like the surrounding restaurants around Palo Alto as well? So it's like when you define your market at the intersection of, a very niche kind of description, it's like, yeah, you quote unquote own the market, but it doesn't matter if that market doesn't exist. So little tidbits on how to see if a company is a monopoly or in perfect competition.
Yeah, all startups be like, we're in a league of our own. Really not.
Cap.
But how do you actually become a monopoly, and how do you actually get to tell the lies that, hey, we're not a monopoly, and you don't have to tell the lies of, hey, I'm my own league, I'm in a league of my own. Like, how do you actually create a monopoly and put yourself in a league of your own? Well, there's a couple traits that you need to have to actually really create a monopoly. And if you have one of these, more likely, if you have all of them, it'll be great. But number one is proprietary technology. What does that mean? It means it can be defined as a product that is difficult or impossible to replicate. For example, Google's search engine, Amazon's distribution network, and then also Apple's operating system. Because iOS, Mac OS, mwah, beautiful.
Chef's kiss.
And so, how much better does it actually need to be than every other product to be really considered a monopoly? Because you see products that are like, oh, we're like a little, we're like 25% faster than this. Like, no, we're talking 10x. Your technology has to be 10x better than the competition in order for you to really have an advantage here in technology, in your technology, to be considered a monopoly. And so, again, same examples like Amazon. They offered more than like 10x the number of books when they first started than an actual bookstore could hold, right? And then PayPal, because Peter Thiel is a founder of PayPal, they offer 10 times a better solution for buying and selling goods on eBay. And then Apple, when we talk about Apple, the thing that makes Apple different is their design. Like the iPad, they absolutely revolutionized the tablet market. Like they actually created the tablet market. If you use a tablet, you really more likely have an iPad, no matter what even PC you have. So if you want to make a monopoly, one of the first steps is your technology going to be 10 times better than the competition?
The second thing that is really interesting is actually network effects. So defined simply, network effects occurs when a product becomes more useful as more people use it. Easy examples of this would be, Facebook. Like more people that use Facebook, the more benefit you get from connecting with more people on Facebook, right? Because it's like a social media platform. Same thing could be said of things like PayPal or Venmo, where it's like the more people that I can pay, the more people that join Venmo, the more people I can pay using Venmo and the better value that I get from having Venmo. So it's like these companies that have really strong network effects, they incentivize people who aren't using their product to use it. And that also makes it really strong to break away from those products as well. Because it's like, well, I don't want to get off Facebook. Like everyone I know is on Facebook. So it's like, it's hard to get away from. But one paradox with this is that uh, to actually execute this for companies that do have good network effect potential, they still must start small, right? If your company needs everyone to join for it to be useful, or like a lot of people, it's gonna fail because no one's gonna join unless they have a good reason to join and benefit right now. So if it takes 1 million people to join your platform before it becomes useful, no one's ever gonna start using it, and you'll never even get off the ground. So that's one of the more interesting things. Just as like context, I think Facebook started at Harvard. It's just like exclusive Harvard people could be on Facebook, and then like I don't know. It's like you start small and then you grow outward.
And so the next step, or the next part of your business that you can do, and this is the approach that Amazon has, right? So if we go back, proprietary technology, Google, you can think Google's like a great example. Their search engine, absolutely just amazing, right? When you talk about network effects, that's Facebook, and also LinkedIn, because who would you connect with on
That's a good example.
Like who would you connect with on LinkedIn if there wasn't, it wasn't a lot of people to connect with. The third is economies of scale, and this is Amazon. You can think of Amazon in this. So this is defined as you produce more, fixed costs are spread over a large number of goods. So an example here could be like a lemonade stand. It costs me $100 a day to like rent out the space for your lemonade stand, and you sell 100 lemonades in a day. That means $1 from each lemonade that you sell has to go towards paying the lemonade stand. Now, let's say sell 1,000 lemonades in a day. Only 10 cents from each lemonade needs to go towards paying for the rent and the setup of that stand. So scale this up to like large companies that are selling millions of products. You can start to save a lot because when you're buying a lot of these products like Walmart, Amazon, like you're able to get them at cheaper rates, and then also the fixed costs become spread out over all the goods, right? And so some bad companies, some like examples of companies that don't scale are brick and mortar businesses, right? And for example, let's use like a yoga studio. So each like if you want to open up a new yoga studio in a different location, this requires managers, instructors, materials. You have to practically spend all the same money that you did to start up your first yoga studio to the next. And this is true for most traditional service businesses, restaurants, and everything like that. Just scaling to amount of people is just going to cost you more, right? But the best types of businesses in terms of scale are software companies. This is Twitter, Facebook. This means that the more people that you can get on to use your service, it doesn't cost you anything more. So the software is very replicable and it's super highly scalable.
The last thing, so there's four. The last thing is branding. And simply defined, branding is just a uniquely strong brand or culture around a company. The easiest example for this is by far, to me at least, Apple. When you think of Apple, you think of minimalistic designs, high attention to detail. It's a premium good. They have exceptional advertising, and of course, Steve Jobs. Um, as a side note, I'm reading the biography of Steve Jobs right now. He's an interesting dude, a little quirky, but interesting.
A little rude.
A little, definitely a little rude as well, but you can read the book and decide that for yourself. And so the thing with branding is that especially like with this example with Apple, a lot of those things we mentioned, except for Steve Jobs, can be pretty easily like mimicked. Like I can charge a premium, price. I can give a lot of attention to detail. I can do these things, but there's still something different about Apple. Like Apple is still, they have like this idea of like think differently, like be creative. Like it's very artistic. It's like it takes a long time to create a brand like Apple's brand. And so just to recap real quick, our four things that make a monopoly, or the things that propel them the most are one, proprietary technology, two, network effects, three, economies of scale, and lastly, number four, branding.
And Apple is a great company because it has all of these. Like one, Apple's like operating system, like that's proprietary technology that's hard to replicate. Two, their network effects. The more people that have iPhones, the more blue messages you can send, right? Number three, economies of scale. They sell a lot of phones and it probably reduces the price of each phone they sell. And then number four, branding. They have probably the best branding for any company out there. So this is something, if you can get all four of these,
Set.
maybe you're building $1 trillion company. But how do you actually start in building a monopoly? Because you can't just wake up one day and be Apple, Google, or Amazon. You need to, number one, start small. So begin in a small and niche market. And it's much easier to dominate the small market compared to the large market where there's going to be a lot of competition and it's not very a good place. You don't really know where to start because like every problem that needs to be solved in that market is already probably being solved because it's such a big market. An example of this, like PayPal started off by specifically serving power sellers on eBay. And these are people that were selling a lot of stuff on eBay because they needed a better payment system. Because what used to happen is that you would have to send like the way people would get paid on eBay was they would have to actually get a check from whoever they sold from. And so eBay just made it where, hey, you can get paid instantly. And the thing is, eBay did not still, eBay, I said eBay, PayPal did not start with everyone in the United States. Like they started specifically with power sellers on eBay. Then once you found that niche market and you found that people really need your solution to their problem, is you got to start scaling up now, right? So once you find that market, slowly expand. And this is an art. You can't, this is a very underrated skill. Like some people try to scale up too fast, but you need to scale up properly. And examples is like Amazon started with books and then they expanded into CDs, videos, and then software like AWS. And just continuously adding more and more, but over time, right? And last but not least is don't disrupt. You want to create a monopoly here, And if you want your path to become a monopoly to be easier, you don't want the big boys to be having their, crosshairs on you, right? So what does disrupting mean? It means creating new technologies that steals or decreases market shares from an established company. And this is really bad because most people are obsessed with like, ooh, I'm making a disruptive company. It's like, are you making a disruptive company as in you're going to try to take down some established company, or are you making new technology that's just going to shake up the world, right? You want the latter, you don't want the former, right? And so disrupting a market draws you a lot of attention, and like I said, established companies will start coming after you. And a great example of this is Napster. So what Napster was is like back, I don't can't remember, it was like early 2000s, like maybe 90s or something. It was this company that allowed you to, like, you would download like music from like iTunes or whatever, and then you would able to actually send it directly to your friends, so they wouldn't have to pay for it. Obviously, this made the music industry very upset because if you can just download one person and share it with everybody, then only one person needs to buy the song. So they obviously got taken down, had a bunch of lawsuits with the music industry, and they have a bunch of lawyers. So you don't want that. You should be creating a new industry, not trying to overtake an existing one. And so Peter Thiel has a nice quote for this. It says, "If your company can be summed up by its opposition to an already existing firm, it can't be completely new, and it probably is not going to become a monopoly." So again, seems contradictory, but we want to create a monopoly.
Wow, that was a lot. Definitely a lot to like unpack there.
Such
Is
good
there
information,
no,
though.
definitely.
Like I read, I guess it's specifically like we're at the stage where we're trying to build a startup.
Mhm.
So it's just like, ah,
It's like, thank you,
I, Mr.
Mr.
Thiel,
Teal.
Mr. Thiel,
Teal.
whichever one you like. But I think, okay, so one of the just when we go back to like the lies, like what the lies that monopolies and competitive people make, like that was such a good point. When he said it, I was like, that's true.
Yeah.
Like you're just like, oh my
It
god.
was like, yeah, that's obvious. Like,
Like
how did I not like notice that? But like, yeah, that's true.
it's like, no, you're not gonna lie about that. So like, and especially just, hearing like, Google come and be like, yeah, it's just because they're going through so much like antitrust, which is just meaning like they're being investigated as a monopoly. They're just like, no, like we're competing against Apple when we're making phones and tablets. We're competing against all advertisers, the Super Bowl. We try to get ads, Facebook. Like we have all this competition from all these directions, but it's like, what is your core business? That is search. And so that was really interesting. And then also just like competitive, like people that always lying, like we're so different. Like startups, like, hey, we're solving this problem. It's like there's already 5 startups doing the same thing you're
Yeah.
doing.
It's like just because you defined it differently and like this like weird like intersection of like three niche markets doesn't mean that like you're gonna blow up. It just means that like your market probably doesn't even exist actually. That's probably what it means.
Like you defined it so small. It's like, is there actually even anyone in there?
Right. But I thought one thing that was really interesting, this is a little like off topic, was this is he says that in business, money is either an important thing or it is everything. And for monopolies, because they can set the price, money isn't everything. And so then you get companies like Google, and their motto is like "Don't be evil," and it's like that's a great motto, but it's like the mom and pop, small business restaurant down the street, they don't have the leeway to be like, don't be evil. Of course, like they're, well, they're probably a family run business or whatever, and like they're not. But it's like when you are in perfect competition, it's like your margins are so razor thin that like you don't have the leeway, you don't have the luxury of extra money to like pay your, your employees as well as you may have liked to, right? So it's like monopolies actually allow for even better treatment of employees and customers if the leadership chooses to.
Yeah, and obviously, like I really want to make clear, you don't want to be building crony capitalism type of monopoly. You don't want to be screwing your customers over because at the end of the day, your customers are who are they're the blood of your, the life support of your company and everything. And so, I just really want to make that clear because it's just kind of wild. You're like,
It is wild.
don't create a monopoly. And then also another thing that he mentioned that was really interesting was a lot of people in business think about like first mover advantage is like super important. Like if I'm the first person to like figure this out, like I'll be set. Like I'm just good. But most of the times, like Apple wasn't the first company to like really make computers, right? Apple wasn't the first company to make phones. Amazon wasn't the first books on, like, probably wasn't the first online bookstore, and they weren't the first, everything store like Walmart. Our Walmart was the first, right? But they just did things better. They just did it a lot. Like, they came into the market, but with the greatest development, with the better technology than the existing people in that market. So it is good if you can actually be the first and be the best to do it. If you're the first and the best, super big. Like, you have a super advantage in that point as well. Like, Google wasn't the first to make search engines, they just made it a lot better. So even if you are last in your market, but you can think of a way to make your technology, make your product just so much better than everybody else's that's in that market, then you still can be a monopoly. You don't have to be the first to be a monopoly, which I thought was like a really good point he made out. It's like, you don't want to be the first. Like, being the first isn't the goal, but it's a nice tactic, but it's not a goal. But if you can be with the first with that type of technology, you're set.
Yeah, and it's like the way he said that, like being first is not a goal, it's a tactic. And it's like the goal is to make the last great development in the market that no one, it's like if you make the last great development, who's competing with you? Like no one, right? It's like it's just pretty much just you. It's like it's Google's on an island of its own. It's like no one's competing with Google in search engine. It's like it's not really happening, you know?
It's
So
not. That being said, y'all, thank you guys for listening. It's been a great episode. New books. We're gonna try. Obviously, maybe if you noticed, the format of this episode is a bit different. We went through the information, then me and Ben just kind of rambled, and we went through some more information. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to pick books, like pick just like the core ideas of like a book. We're gonna keep it at 2 episodes per book, so there's not gonna be a month anymore. At max, if a book is like has that many just great ideas, it'll be 3, but it's most of the time it's going to be 2,
two.
with this format of giving you guys information, kind of just talking about it, because we felt a bit robotic in our last episodes. And yeah, and also we're still going to have the discussions where we just, talk more, probably even talk more about like our startup, and maybe even try to like compare it and see. So yeah, with that being said, do you want to go through this recap? I know it's a lot.
Yeah, there's lots of recap, so I'm gonna break this down real quick for y'all. So we started off with the progress. We have horizontal progress and we have vertical progress. Horizontal being creating more of what's already been created. Vertical being creating something new, so creating new technology. And we need new technology because without new technology, we cannot actually improve the world. We need new technology to really push us forward. Um, Continuing on, progress isn't automatic, it's earned, right? We can expect progress, but we still have to go and create that progress. And then going on further, we have competition. Oh, sorry. The movers of the world are startups. So startups are really the small groups of people that create new technology. And then in that, you want to be shooting for no competition. Competition is for losers. You want to create a new market, create something that's different, that is so much better than everyone else's, that you create a monopoly, which paradoxically could be good. We think so, possibly. And then ending off with what makes a monopoly, our second half. Um, Hold up, give me 1 second. Let's see, yes. Monopolies are valued by the cash flows in the future. It doesn't matter how much they've made in the past. All that matters is how much they will make in the future. Monopolies often lie about when they're monopolies by hiding their market. And then people in perfect competition do the same, but the opposite by saying we're in a league of our own. Um, Monopolies are pushed forward. They are created by proprietary technology, network effects, economies of scale, and lastly, branding. And then to create a monopoly, you want to start small, scale up, and then the last thing is don't disrupt. I hope you enjoyed that little recap. That was a lot for me.
Man's about to just pass out.
But now it's time for my favorite part of the episode, quotes from Armelicus Melius.
Every moment in business only happens once. The next Bill Gates will not build an operating system. The next Larry Page or Sergey Brin won't make a search engine. And the next Mark Zuckerberg won't create a social network. If you're copying these guys, you aren't learning from them. That was actually in the intro chapter of his book, and that hit me.
Yeah,
That really
that's
did.
like his opening line.
Like, it's like, you're right. Like, I gotta, like, I want to be as great as them, but I won't be them. I'll be Armel Tala. It'll be Ben Smith. We'll be great people. So last but not least, because competition is for losers. Show me a good loser, and I'll show you a loser. really just saying there is no such thing as a good loser. You are just a loser. Competition's for losers. Build a monopoly.
Honestly, I think he might be a sore loser, but that's just me.
Yeah, nah. I mean, you could be a peaceful, respectful. When you lose, shake people's hands and be gentleman about it. But you're still a loser. So
You still took that
you
out.
still took the L. So if we're competitive, baby, you don't want to do that. But you guys, thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, share, leave us a review, please. Check out clothing brand in the link below. Check out the social medias. Till next time, peace.